The Dravokian Empire was the kind of place that made other civilizations nervous. 12-star systems bowed to Emperor Vrax, and his palace alone was larger than most planetary capitals. Gold-veined marble stretched as far as the eye could see, and the throne room could fit 3 battleships side by side. The Emperor had conquered worlds, negotiated treaties that reshaped galactic politics, and commanded fleets that made warlords think twice before causing trouble. But right now, none of that mattered. Because Emperor Vrax had a problem that no amount of military power could solve. His 3 baby dragons wouldn't stop screaming. The sound echoed through the entire western wing of the palace, a high-pitched shrieking that made servants wince and guards shift uncomfortably at their posts. It had been going on for hours. The Imperial steward stood outside the nursery doors, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. "That's the 16th one," he muttered, watching as medical staff rushed past with another unconscious caretaker on a stretcher. Her uniform was singed black in several places, and her hands were wrapped in emergency bandages. She'd lasted 4 hours. That was actually better than average. Inside the nursery, the chaos was even worse than it sounded. Scorch marks decorated walls that had been pristine just weeks ago. The custom-made curtains hung in shreds. 3 separate observation windows had stress fractures running through them from the sonic impact of dragon shrieks. An expensive monitoring console sparked uselessly in the corner, its screen cracked straight down the middle. And in 3 elaborately crafted cribs sat the source of all this destruction. The hatchlings were tiny, relatively speaking. Each one was roughly the size of a large cat, with scales that shimmered in shades of emerald, sapphire, and ruby. Their wings were delicate translucent things that looked too fragile to ever support flight. They should have been adorable. Instead, they were absolutely terrifying to anyone who got within 10 feet of them. The emerald one breathed a small jet of flame that scorched the edge of its blanket. The sapphire one shrieked again, and another hairline crack appeared in the nearest window. The ruby one huddled in the corner of its crib, scales bristling like knives. Emperor Vrax stood in his private office, watching the nursery feed on a dozen different screens. He'd been in negotiations with the Frontier Coalition when the latest caretaker had quit. He'd excused himself, claiming urgent business, and now he stood alone watching his children destroy another room. They weren't trying to be difficult. He knew that. They were just babies, barely 3 weeks old. But dragon babies were different from most species' offspring. When they got scared or upset, instinct kicked in. Fire came naturally. Their scales hardened into defensive positions. And their vocal cords could produce frequencies that resonated with glass and crystal. The problem was that everything scared them. "Your Majesty." One of his senior advisors entered carefully. "The Nanny Guild has formally declined to send anyone else. They're saying the liability is too high." Vrax's claws scraped against the edge of his desk. "What about the Centauri Academy?" "They've blacklisted the position. Apparently, word has spread through every major childcare institution in the sector." The advisor shifted nervously. "Some of them are calling it a suicide mission. They're babies, not weapons." "With respect, Your Majesty, the medical reports suggest otherwise. Burns, lacerations, hearing damage, psychological trauma. And that's just from the last week." Vrax felt his temper rising. "So what do you suggest? That I lock my children away? Sedate them into compliance? They're the heirs to this empire, not prisoners." "Of course not, Your Majesty. But perhaps some of the more advanced containment protocols." "Get out." The advisor left quickly. Vrax turned back to the screens, watching his children cry and flame and huddle together in fear. They didn't understand why people kept leaving them. Why everyone who came near them seemed terrified. Why the world felt so big and cold and frightening. He'd been so prepared for the political challenges of raising heirs. The succession concerns, the diplomatic complications, the security risks. He hadn't been prepared for the simple fact that nobody could figure out how to take care of them without getting hurt. The Imperial steward appeared in the doorway, looking hesitant. That was unusual. The man had served 3 generations of emperors and rarely showed uncertainty. "Speak," Vrax said tiredly. "There might be one more option, Your Majesty. It's unconventional. Everything we've tried has been conventional. It hasn't worked. There's a human working in the palace medical wing. She treats the staff for minor injuries and illnesses. Humans have this reputation in certain circles." The steward paused, choosing his words carefully. "They're known for being unusually comfortable around dangerous creatures. On their homeworld, they apparently domesticated predators as companions. They raise orphaned animals that would kill most handlers. There are documented cases of humans bonding with species that every expert said were impossible to tame. Vrax had heard the stories about humans. They were a relatively new species on the galactic stage, having only achieved faster-than-light travel a few generations ago. But they'd spread quickly, filling niches that other species avoided. They worked in extreme environments, handled volatile situations with strange calmness, and had this bizarre tendency to treat everything like it could be a friend. Most species considered them reckless. A few considered them insane. But nobody could deny that they got results in situations where conventional wisdom failed. This human in our medical wing, Vrax said slowly. Does she have any experience with childcare? I don't know, Your Majesty. But at this point, what do we have to lose? Vrax looked at the screens again. His children, crying and alone and afraid. 16 trained professionals had tried and failed. Maybe it was time to try something unconventional. Summon her, he said. Immediately. Katie Rodriguez was reorganizing medical supplies when the summons came. She'd been working at the Imperial Palace for about 6 months now, mostly treating minor injuries and the occasional space flu that spread through the staff quarters. It was steady work, good pay, and the Dravokians were generally polite employers even if they did tend to treat humans like fascinating oddities. But a direct summons from the Imperial Steward? That was new. She grabbed her medical kit out of habit and followed the messenger through corridors that got progressively fancier. The staff sections had basic functionality, but these halls were something else entirely. Vaulted ceilings stretched overhead, covered in murals depicting historical battles and diplomatic triumphs. The floor was so polished she could see her reflection. The steward met her outside a set of massive doors. He looked exhausted, and Katie noticed his scales had lost some of their usual luster. Stress, probably. She'd seen it before in overworked administrators. Thank you for coming so quickly, he said, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into English. I need to explain the situation before we enter. Okay, Katie said simply. The Emperor's 3 hatchlings require care. However, they've proven extremely difficult to manage. Previous caretakers have suffered significant injuries. Burns, lacerations, hearing damage. We've gone through 16 qualified professionals in the last month alone. Katie raised an eyebrow. 16? What's wrong with the babies? Wrong? Nothing is wrong with them. They are perfectly healthy dragon hatchlings. That's precisely the problem. The steward pulled up a datapad, showing her medical reports. When distressed, they produce flames. Their scales are razor-sharp. Their vocal range can shatter reinforced materials. Every caretaker has attempted to follow standard protocols, and every one has been injured or psychologically overwhelmed. Katie scanned the reports. Second-degree burns. Defensive lacerations. One person had apparently suffered a nervous breakdown after only 2 hours. What protocols were they using? State-of-the-art xenobiological childcare standards. Remote handling equipment, nutritionally optimized feeding systems, comprehensive monitoring for safety compliance. Aha. Katie had a feeling she knew where this was going. And the babies hated all of it. The steward blinked in surprise. How did you know? Because it sounds terrifying for a baby. Cold robot arms picking you up, weird paste for food, machines beeping at you constantly. I'd probably breathe fire too if someone tried that on me. Before the steward could respond, another shriek echoed from behind the doors. Katie winced at the sound. Can I see them? I must warn you, the situation is volatile. We have protective equipment prepared, emergency medical staff on standby. Let's just start with me taking a look, Katie said gently. The doors opened, and Katie stepped into what looked like a disaster zone. Her first thought was that someone had fought a small war in here. Scorch marks covered the walls in random patterns. What had probably been beautiful tapestries hung in burned tatters. Broken equipment littered the corners. The whole room smelled like smoke and fear. Then she saw the cribs. They were elaborate things, probably custom-made and incredibly expensive. But the babies inside them made her heart break a little. 3 tiny dragons huddled in their separate cribs, scales bristling, wings tucked tight. The emerald one was breathing little puffs of flame. The sapphire one kept making these distressed chirping sounds between shrieks. The ruby one had wedged itself into the corner of its crib, trying to make itself as small as possible. Katie could hear palace staff shuffling nervously behind her, probably ready to pull her back if things went wrong. She ignored them and walked slowly toward the cribs. Hey there, she said softly. Rough day, here? The emerald hatchling hissed at her, flame flickering from its nostrils. Katie stopped walking but didn't back up. She'd grown up on a farm in Texas, spent plenty of time around animals that could hurt you if they wanted to. Horses, cattle, even a few snakes. The trick was usually pretty simple: don't act like a threat, and don't act scared. She pulled over a chair, one of the few pieces of furniture that hadn't been destroyed, and sat down right between the cribs. Close enough to reach the babies, but not crowding them. The steward made a strangled sound. "What are you doing? The safety distance is at least 3 meters. They're scared," Katie said, keeping her voice calm and even. "Look at them. They're not attacking. They're defending." The sapphire hatchling shrieked again, but Katie noticed it was watching her with wide eyes. Curious, maybe. Or confused about why this stranger wasn't running away or pulling out mechanical equipment. Katie started humming. It was completely unconscious at first, just something she did when she was thinking. An old lullaby her grandmother used to sing, simple melody with no words. Her abuela had sung it in Spanish, but the tune worked in any language. Or no language at all. The shrieking stopped. All 3 hatchlings turned to stare at her. The room got quiet except for the soft humming and the distant sounds of the palace. Katie kept it up, pulling out her datapad to review the care instructions the steward had mentioned. Optimal temperature ranges, feeding schedules, developmental milestones. Standard stuff, really, even if the specific details were for dragons instead of human babies. The ruby hatchling made a small sound, not a shriek this time. More like a question. "I know," Katie said, glancing up with a smile. "Everything's been pretty scary lately, hasn't it? Lots of strangers with weird equipment, nobody staying around long enough for you to figure out if they are safe." She noticed their breathing was slowing down. The flames had stopped. The emerald one was still watching her suspiciously, but it had stopped bristling. Behind her, she could hear whispered conversations among the staff. Disbelief, mostly. Someone said something about sedation fields and another person mentioned emergency protocols. Katie ignored them all. She just kept humming and reading, letting the babies get used to her presence. No sudden movements. No trying to grab them or fix them or control them. Just being there, calm and steady. After about 20 minutes, the sapphire hatchling did something unexpected. It crawled to the edge of its crib, tiny claws gripping the rails, and stretched its neck toward Katie. Not threatening. Just curious. Katie slowly extended her hand, palm up, letting the baby sniff her. The hatchling's nostrils flared, processing her scent. Then it made a soft chirping sound and nudged her hand with its snout. The steward actually gasped. "Well, hello to you too," Katie said softly, carefully scratching under the hatchling's chin. Its scales were warm, almost hot to the touch, but not burning. The baby leaned into the contact, making that chirping sound again. "How are you doing that?" someone whispered. Katie looked back at the gathered staff. "I'm not doing anything special. I'm just not afraid of them. But they're dangerous. They're babies who've been surrounded by scared adults for weeks. Babies pick up on that stuff. They can tell when someone's terrified of them, and it makes them terrified too." Katie turned back to the hatchlings. The emerald and ruby ones were watching now, seeing their sibling getting positive attention. She stood up slowly, keeping her movements smooth and predictable. Then she did something that made every Dravokian in the room freeze. She reached into the sapphire hatchling's crib with her bare hands. "Don't," the steward started. Katie lifted the baby dragon out of its crib, supporting its weight against her chest like she'd done with countless animals back home. The hatchling tensed for a second, claws flexing. Katie felt the pinpricks through her uniform but didn't react. She just kept humming, swaying slightly. The sapphire hatchling tucked its head under her chin and made a sound she hadn't heard in any of the reports. A soft, contented rumble. "Okay," Katie said, looking at the stunned staff. "I think we can work with this." Katie spent the first full day just observing. The palace staff kept trying to brief her on procedures and protocols, but she waved them off politely. She'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the best way to understand a situation was to watch and listen instead of following someone else's rulebook. The 3 hatchlings had calmed down considerably once she'd held the sapphire one, but they were still on edge. Jumpy. Every time someone entered the room, their little heads would snap around and their scales would start bristling. Ready for whatever scary thing was about to happen next. Katie noticed patterns pretty quickly. Around feeding time, a server would roll in this elaborate machine that dispensed perfectly measured portions of nutritional paste. The paste was apparently scientifically formulated to contain everything a growing dragon needed. It probably was nutritionally perfect. It also looked like gray sludge and smelled vaguely chemical. The babies hated it. They'd turn their heads away, make distressed sounds, and sometimes knock the feeding dishes over in frustration. Then they'd get hungry and upset, which led to flames and shrieking, which led to staff panicking and backing away, which made the babies more upset. The whole cycle just fed into itself. Has anyone tried giving them different food? Katie asked the xenobiologist who'd been assigned to monitor her. The reptilian scientist looked offended. The nutritional paste is optimized based on extensive research into dragon dietary requirements. It contains the precise ratios of proteins, minerals, and vitamins necessary for healthy development. Right, but do they like it? Like it? They're infants. They don't have preferences yet. Katie looked at the 3 hatchlings, who were currently huddled together in one crib, pointedly ignoring their food dishes. Pretty sure they do. She started making small changes. Nothing dramatic at first, just testing things out. She requested some actual meat from the palace kitchens, not processed paste. Raw, because these were predators after all. The kitchen staff looked at her like she was crazy, but they sent up some cuts of something that looked vaguely like beef. Katie cut it into small pieces and offered one to the emerald hatchling. The baby sniffed it suspiciously, then grabbed it with its tiny claws and tore into it with surprising enthusiasm. The other 2 immediately crowded over, chirping and demanding their own pieces. See? Katie said. They just wanted real food. The xenobiologist was frantically taking notes. But the texture, the inconsistency, the lack of nutritional standardization. They're eating, they're happy, and nobody's getting flamed. I'll call that a win. The monitoring equipment was the next thing that had to go. There were sensors everywhere, tracking temperature, movement, respiratory rates, and a dozen other metrics. Every few minutes, something would beep or chirp or flash. The constant noise and activity kept the babies in a state of mild stress. Katie started unplugging things. The steward nearly had a heart attack when he saw her disconnecting the primary monitoring suite. We need those readings for health tracking, he protested. You can check on them a few times a day instead of every 30 seconds, Katie said, pulling another cable. Constant monitoring is stressing them out. Look at them. She pointed to the hatchlings, who were visibly more relaxed now that the beeping had stopped. They were actually playing, in their own clumsy way. The ruby one was trying to pounce on its own tail while the others watched. But what if there's an emergency? Then I'll call you. I promise. The lighting was another issue. The nursery had these bright overhead lights that apparently were standard for Dravokian facilities. Made sense for a species with different eye structures. But Katie noticed the hatchlings kept squinting and tucking their heads under their wings. She dimmed the lights way down, until the room had a softer, warmer glow. The babies immediately perked up, looking around with more interest instead of discomfort. But the biggest change, the one that really made the palace staff lose their minds, was when Katie requested blankets. Blankets? The steward repeated, like she'd asked for something completely absurd. Yeah, soft ones. For babies. Their scales will shred any fabric. It's a waste of resources. Then we'll get more blankets, Katie said firmly. They need something soft and comforting. Not just hard surfaces and cold metal. The first batch of blankets arrived an hour later. They were simple things, made from some kind of synthetic fiber that was apparently common in the Empire. Katie folded one and placed it in each crib, then picked up the emerald hatchling. The baby tensed immediately, expecting the cold mechanical arms that previous caretakers had used. Instead, Katie wrapped it gently in a blanket and cradled it against her chest. The transformation was immediate. The hatchling's rigid posture softened. Its scales lay flat instead of bristling. It made a small sound, almost like a sigh, and nestled into the warmth. Katie picked up the other 2, one at a time, wrapping each in its own blanket. Soon she had all 3 dragons cradled in her arms, their small bodies warm and surprisingly heavy. They chirped softly, bumping their heads against each other and against Katie's chest. The xenobiologist was recording everything frantically. This shouldn't be possible. Direct contact with their scales should be causing lacerations. The temperature of their bodies should be uncomfortable for a human. The weight distribution alone. They're not trying to hurt me, Katie said simply. So they're not hurting me. She'd seen this before, back on Earth. Animals were a lot smarter and more aware than people gave them credit for. They knew the difference between someone who was trying to help and someone who was scared of them. These dragon babies could absolutely control their scales and their temperature and their strength when they wanted to. They just hadn't wanted to, not when everyone around them was treating them like dangerous weapons instead of children. Over the next few days, Katie established a routine. Morning feeding with real food, cut into appropriately sized pieces. Playtime where she let them explore the nursery under supervision, practicing their wobbly attempts at flight. Afternoon naps where she'd sit nearby, reading or humming while they slept curled up in their blankets. Evening cuddles before bed, where she'd hold all three and tell them stories about Earth. The stories seemed to fascinate them. Katie talked about horses and dogs and cats, about farms and oceans and mountains. She told them about her grandmother's ranch, about raising orphan calves and teaching puppies not to bite too hard. The hatchlings would watch her face intently, like they were trying to understand every word. The flames stopped almost entirely. Only occasional small puffs when they got really excited during play. The shrieking was replaced by chirps, trills, and that rumbling purr sound they made when content. Their scales stayed smooth and flat when Katie was around. Word spread through the palace fast. Servants would find excuses to walk past the nursery, peeking in to see the human sitting on the floor with 3 baby dragons climbing all over her like she was a piece of furniture. The emperor himself watched the monitoring feeds, though Katie had reduced those significantly. Other species representatives requested to observe her methods. They came with datapads and recording equipment, studying every interaction like it was some kind of advanced science. Katie tried to explain it to them, but most didn't really get it. "There's no secret technique," she said, currently bottle feeding the sapphire hatchling some warm broth. "Babies need a few basic things. They need to feel safe. They need consistent routines so they know what to expect. They need physical comfort and affection. And they need someone who isn't afraid of them." But the danger, one observer started. "They're only dangerous when they're scared or defending themselves. So I don't scare them, and I don't give them reasons to defend themselves." Katie switched the bottle to the ruby hatchling, who grabbed it eagerly with its claws. "Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We lived alongside predators on Earth. We raised wolf puppies that became dogs. We bottle-fed orphan bear cubs. We taught baby elephants whose mothers died. It's just what we do." The emerald hatchling chirped impatiently, wanting its turn with the bottle. Katie smiled and adjusted her position so she could feed all 3. "They're not that different from any other babies," she said softly. "They just needed someone willing to figure out what they actually needed instead of what a textbook said they should need." 3 weeks into Katie's tenure as the Imperial Dragon's caretaker, the palace had transformed from a place of constant crisis into something resembling normalcy. The medical staff no longer kept emergency burn treatment on standby. The steward had stopped looking like he expected disaster at any moment. And the 3 hatchlings had stopped being terrifying little nightmares and started acting like actual babies. Katie had moved a comfortable chair into the nursery along with a small table for her personal things. She practically lived in the room now, and honestly, she didn't mind. The hatchlings had become her whole world, and watching them grow and develop was genuinely fascinating. The Emerald One, who Katie had privately started calling Ember, was the bold adventurer of the group. Every morning, Ember would be the first one awake, chirping loudly until Katie came over. The little dragon had figured out that if it flapped its wings hard enough, it could hover for almost 3 seconds before tumbling back down. Ember practiced constantly, determined to master flight even though the wings were still too small to support sustained flight. The sapphire hatchling, Sky in Katie's mind, was the curious one. Sky loved exploring anything new that came into the nursery. When Katie brought in a new blanket or a different toy, Sky would investigate it thoroughly, sniffing it from every angle and occasionally trying to taste it. Katie had to watch that one carefully because Sky had already tried to eat a monitoring tablet and one of Katie's hair ties. The ruby dragon, Ash, was the cautious sensitive one. Ash took longer to warm up to changes and would often hide behind Katie's chair when strangers entered the room. But once Ash decided someone was safe, the little dragon became incredibly affectionate, constantly nuzzling and making those rumbling purr sounds. The daily routine had become second nature. Katie would wake up on the cot sheet had moved into the adjacent room, usually because she could hear the baby starting to stir. She'd shuffle into the nursery, still half asleep, and 3 sets of jewel-bright eyes would light up at the sight of her. Breakfast was always an adventure. The kitchen had started sending up a variety of foods after Katie's requests, and she'd learned through trial and error what the hatchlings preferred. They liked their meat raw but slightly warmed. They enjoyed some fruits, especially the Andromedan berries that grew in the palace gardens. They absolutely hated anything with a slimy texture, which had led to one memorable incident with some kind of jellyfish delicacy that the cook had thought they might enjoy. Feeding 3 baby dragons simultaneously required coordination. Katie had developed a system where she'd sit cross-legged on the floor and let them cluster around her, each one knowing to wait their turn. Ember usually tried to steal bites from the others, which led to gentle scolding and reminder chirps from Katie. Sky would eat quickly and then try to investigate whatever Katie had in her pockets. Ash ate carefully, savoring each bite. Mid-morning was playtime, and this was when the observers usually showed up. Scientists, childcare specialists, and diplomats from various worlds would stand at the observation windows, recording everything. Katie had set up a small obstacle course using pillows, boxes, and soft barriers. The hatchlings would practice flying between obstacles, pouncing on targets, and playing something that looked suspiciously like tag. Their coordination was improving daily. What had been clumsy tumbles a few weeks ago were now controlled glides. The development rate is remarkable, one xenobiologist noted, speaking into her recording device. Previous studies suggested dragon hatchlings required months to achieve this level of motor control. Katie, currently being used as a launching platform by Ember, just smiled. They were too stressed before. Hard to develop properly when you're constantly scared. The afternoons were quieter. After lunch and some more play, the hatchlings would get drowsy. Katie would gather all three in her arms, settle into her chair, and read to them from her tablet. She downloaded a bunch of books from Earth's databases, everything from children's stories to nature documentaries. The hatchlings seemed to love the stories about animals. Katie would show them pictures of lions, whales, eagles, and bears. She'd explain how each animal lived, what they ate, how they raised their young. The dragons would watch the screen intently, making soft sounds when something particularly interesting appeared. "This is a mema bear with her cubs," Katie said one afternoon, showing them a video of a grizzly family. "See how she protects them? She teaches them how to find food, how to stay safe. That's what mamas do." Sky chirped and nuzzled closer to the screen. Ember tried to touch the image with one tiny claw. "Your dad loves you like that," Katie continued softly. "He's just been really busy keeping the whole empire running. But he's going to visit more soon. I promise." She'd been working on that actually. The Emperor watched the monitoring feeds religiously, she'd learned. But watching wasn't the same as being present. Katie had sent several polite but firm messages through the steward suggesting that the hatchlings needed to see their father in person. The evening routine was Katie's favorite part of the day. As the palace quieted down and the artificial lights dimmed to simulate night, she'd prepare the hatchlings for bed. Each one got a warm bath in a specially prepared tub, their scales gently cleaned and dried. They loved the water, splashing and playing until the bathroom was soaked. Then came the bedtime ritual. Katie would wrap each dragon in its favorite blanket, the fabric now showing signs of tiny claw marks and scorch marks from happy little puffs of flame. She'd place them in their cribs, which they'd finally accepted as safe sleeping spaces instead of prisons. But before they'd settle, they needed their song. Katie had expanded beyond humming now. She'd sing actual lullabies, some in English, some in Spanish that her grandmother had taught her. The hatchlings didn't understand the words, but they knew the melodies meant safety and sleep and someone who cared about them. "Duermit mi Nino, duermit mi amor," Katie sang softly, her voice filling the quiet nursery. "Duermit pedazo de mi corazon." 3 pairs of eyes would slowly blink closed. 3 small bodies would relax into sleep. And Katie would sit there for a while longer, just watching them breathe, their scales rising and falling in the dim light. The palace staff had stopped questioning her methods. The results spoke for themselves. The hatchlings were healthy, gaining weight appropriately, hitting their developmental milestones early. More importantly, they were happy. They played, they explored, they showed curiosity and affection instead of fear and aggression. Representatives from other worlds had started making requests. Could humans help with their own difficult childcare situations? There was apparently a whole market for caretakers willing to work with species that others found too challenging. Katie found it funny, honestly. To her, this wasn't particularly difficult. It was just basic childcare with some extra considerations for the fire-breathing and the scales. The core principles remained the same across species: consistency, affection, patience, and treating babies like individuals instead of problems to solve. One evening, as she was settling the hatchlings down, Sky reached out with one small claw and gently touched Katie's face. The gesture was so tender, so deliberate, that Katie felt her eyes water a bit. "I love you guys too," she whispered. And in that moment, surrounded by 3 baby dragons who trusted her completely, Katie understood something important. Humans hadn't become successful across the galaxy because they were the strongest or the smartest or the most technologically advanced. They succeeded because they had this weird capacity to love things that others feared. To see potential friends instead of threats. To believe that with enough patience and compassion, Almost anything could be nurtured into something beautiful. Even tiny dragons who breathed fire. The summons came on a quiet afternoon when Katie was teaching the hatchlings a new game. She'd scattered some soft toys around the nursery, and the 3 dragons were taking turns finding and bringing them back to her. Ember was winning, naturally, because the little emerald dragon turned everything into a competition. The steward appeared at the door, looking noticeably more relaxed than he had 2 months ago. His scales had regained their healthy shine, and he actually smiled occasionally now. "The Emperor requests your presence," he said. "Whenever you're available, of course." Katie glanced at the hatchlings, who were now arguing over who got to retrieve the next toy. Sky had pinned Ash down gently, and Ember was trying to referee by chirping loudly at both of them. "Give me 20 minutes to get them settled for their nap," Katie asked. "Of course. I'll wait." Katie gathered the 3 dragons, which had become significantly easier now that they actually wanted to be held. They were getting bigger too, each one roughly the size of a medium dog now instead of a cat. Their wings had grown stronger, and they could actually fly short distances instead of just hovering and crashing. She wrapped them in their blankets, sang their favorite lullaby, and waited until all 3 were dozing peacefully. Then she quietly slipped out, leaving the door slightly open so she could hear if they woke up. The Emperor's private study was in a completely different wing of the palace, one Katie had never visited. The halls here were even more elaborate, with historical artifacts displayed in protected cases and portraits of previous rulers lining the walls. It felt less like a workplace and more like a museum. Emperor Vrax stood by a massive window overlooking the capital city when Katie entered. He was tall, even for a Dravokian, his scales a deep bronze color that caught the light. Everything about him radiated power and authority. Katie felt distinctly underdressed in her simple work uniform with baby dragon spit-up stains on the shoulder. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing slightly because it seemed appropriate. "Katie Rodriguez." His voice was deep, resonant. "Please, sit." There were chairs arranged near the window, comfortable-looking things that were scaled for Dravokian proportions. Katie perched on the edge of one, feeling a bit like a kid sitting in adult furniture. The Emperor settled across from her, and for a moment, he just studied her. Katie resisted the urge to fidget. "I've been watching the monitoring feeds," he finally said. "Every day. Sometimes multiple times per day." "I reduced those, sorry. The constant monitoring was stressing the babies out." "Don't apologize. You were right to do so." He leaned forward slightly. "What you've accomplished with my children is nothing short of miraculous. 16 trained professionals failed where you succeeded. I want to understand how." Katie considered her words carefully. "I didn't really do anything special, Your Majesty. I just treated them like babies instead of like dangerous weapons." "That simple?" "Pretty much, yeah." Katie shifted in her seat. "Everyone who came before me was so focused on safety protocols and risk management that they forgot they were dealing with children. Scared children who needed someone to make them feel safe, not someone who was terrified of them." The Emperor was quiet for a moment. "You risked significant injury. The reports from previous caretakers documented severe burns, lacerations." "They weren't trying to hurt me," Katie interrupted gently. "They were defending themselves because they were scared. Once I showed them I wasn't a threat, they had no reason to hurt me." "Still, the courage required." Katie laughed, surprising herself. "Your Majesty, with respect, it wasn't courage. Humans don't really think about it that way. We've been raising dangerous babies for thousands of years back on Earth. Wolf pups, bear cubs, big cats, baby alligators. My grandmother used to bottle feed orphan coyote pups on her ranch. My cousin raises rescue raptors. It's just what we do." "Your species is remarkable," the Emperor said quietly. "We're just wired differently, I think. We see a baby, any baby, and something in our brains just goes protect that, care for that, love that. Even if that baby has claws and breathes fire." The Emperor stood and walked to his desk, picking up a datapad. "I want to reward you appropriately. The survival and well-being of my heirs is invaluable to the Empire. Name your price. Territory, wealth, a position of significant political power, whatever you desire." Katie blinked. She honestly hadn't thought about payment beyond her regular salary. A raise would be nice? Maybe 20%. The Emperor stared at her. 20%. Is that too much? I can negotiate. That's absurdly little for what you've done. He set the datapad down. You could ask for a fortune and I would grant it. I don't need a fortune, Your Majesty, I like my job. The babies are amazing, and I'm happy taking care of them. Katie hesitated. But there is one thing I'd like to ask for. Anything. Spend time with them. An hour every day, minimum. They need their father, not just a caretaker. The Emperor's expression shifted into something Katie couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe. Or discomfort. I have responsibilities across the Empire, he said slowly. Critical negotiations, military oversight, diplomatic. I know. And those things are important. But so are your kids. Katie stood up, feeling bold. They're going to rule this empire someday, right? They need to know their father. They need to feel loved by you, not just protected from a distance. I don't know how, the Emperor admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. My own father was distant. Always occupied with matters of state. I barely knew him. I swore I wouldn't repeat that mistake, yet here I am. Katie's expression softened. Then let me teach you. It's not complicated, I promise. You just need to be present. Hold them. Talk to them. Play with them. Let them know you're there. Over the following weeks, Katie became not just a caretaker but a teacher. The Emperor would arrive at the nursery every afternoon, and Katie would show him how to interact with his children. The first attempts were awkward. He held the hatchlings like they might break, stiff and uncertain. They're tougher than they look, Katie encouraged, demonstrating how to support Ember's weight while the dragon tried to climb up her arm. See? Just let them explore. Gradually, the Emperor relaxed. He learned that Sky loved having the ridge above the eyes scratched. That Ash preferred gentle rocking motions. That Ember would challenge anyone to play wrestling matches and got pouty if ignored. Katie watched as the transformation happened. The Emperor's rigid posture would soften when he entered the nursery. He started smiling more, laughing when the hatchlings did something particularly silly. He began sharing stories about his own childhood, telling the dragons about the history of their family line. The change wasn't just in him. The hatchlings adored their father, chirping excitedly whenever he arrived. They'd compete for his attention, showing off their latest flying achievements or bringing him toys to admire. One evening, Katie found the Emperor sitting on the floor, all three hatchlings piled in his lap while he read them a historical text about their ancestors. His deep voice filled the nursery with stories of great battles and wise rulers. The babies were completely entranced. Katie quietly backed out of the room. They didn't need her right now. This was their time. After 3 months, Katie began transitioning back to her regular medical duties. The Emperor had learned everything he needed to know, and the hatchlings were thriving. They were bigger now, able to fly across the entire nursery, their personalities fully developed and bright. The palace had changed too. Word had spread across the galaxy about the human who'd tamed the impossible hatchlings. Requests came flooding in from other species, other families dealing with challenging childcare situations. Could humans help with their problems too? An entire industry emerged. Human caretakers became sought after across multiple systems, their unusual fearlessness and nurturing instincts valued in situations where conventional approaches failed. Katie still visited the nursery regularly, but now as a friend rather than a caretaker. The hatchlings would mob her with affection, chattering about everything they'd been doing. The Emperor would thank her again, though she always waved it off. Years later, when the 3 dragons had grown into magnificent adults ruling their own territories, they never forgot the human who'd first showed them kindness. They kept human advisors close, treated them with special respect, and funded programs to bring more humans into childcare positions across the empire. And sometimes, late at night in their own palaces, they'd remember a soft voice singing lullabies in a strange language, warm arms holding them close, and the lesson that every baby deserves someone brave enough to love them through the scary parts. Even baby dragons who breathed fire.